Okay, hi guys. Look, 444. 444. All right, so we've got Think Thought is Frequency Part 3. We're going to look at some older research on this. A man named William James, who is called the father of psychology in this reality. But he first studied psychology, and then he moved on to sorry, I got distracted. He first studied psychology and then he found that inadequate, and so he moved on to philosophy. So we're just going to, I'm not going to go over his entire history here, but in reading it, it seems like, he was raised as an elitist. So it's uncertain, what his allegiances were. But he did write several books, Pragmatism, A Pluralistic Universe, and The Meaning of Truth. Pragmatism, comma, A Pluralistic Universe, comma, and The Meaning of Truth. He had a textbook, Some Problems on Philosophy, that he didn't complete. So there are a lot of collected essays and things. In a pluralistic universe, it says, he castigates philosophers who use technical jargon instead of clear, straightforward language. So he didn't quite fit in. I'm not really sure why he's being called the father of psychology. I had to go through Google search and go pretty far down on the page to find this, because he did start out studying ESP, extrasensory extrasensory perception. I can't talk today. All right, so by the early 1890s, when James published his first two books on psychology, the discipline was in the process of splitting off from philosophical speculation. Psychology literally means the study of the soul, to establish itself as an empirical social science. Despite impatience with the process of that development, he contributed significantly to moving it along, regarding psychology as the science of our mental phenomenon or states of consciousness, such as thoughts, feelings, desires, volitions, and so forth, which we know, we believe, or we are getting close to believing. These are frequencies: thoughts, feelings, desires, volitions, and so forth. The stream of consciousness and the self. In analyzing what can broadly be termed human thinking, James delineates 5 generic characteristics. 1. All thought is owned by some personal self. Owned. Number 2, all thought as experienced by human consciousness is constantly in flux and never static. Number 3, nevertheless, there is an ongoing I can't pronounce today. There is an ongoing continuity of thought for every thinker, as it moves from one object to another, like the alternating times of flight and perching in a bird's life, constantly comprising shifting foci, or that's plural for focus, and the contextual fringes within which they are given. And 4, thought typically deals with objects different from and independent of consciousness itself, so that two minds can experience common objects. And 5, consciousness takes an interest in particular objects, choosing to focus on them rather than on others. This self can be viewed as an object of thought or as the subject of thought. Let's reread that. The self can be viewed as an object of thought or as the subject of thought. The former is the empirical self, or me, while the latter is the pure ego, or I. So the me is the object of the thought The I is the subject of the thought. The dimensions of the empirical self, me, include the material self, comprised of one's body and such extensions of it as one's clothing, immediate family, and home. The social self, or significant interpersonal relationships, and the spiritual self, one's personality, character, and defining values. The pure ego, I, identifiable with the soul of traditional metaphysics, cannot be an object of science and should not be assumed to be a substance. Sensation, perception, imagination, and belief. James states that if we track the dynamic of mental activity, we discern a standard pattern from sensation to perception to imagination to belief. Through sensation, we become acquainted with some given fact. This can, but need not lead to knowledge about that fact, achieved by perceiving its relations to other given facts. Both sensation and perception involve an immediate intuition of some given objects. So you have to have some idea of what you're about to look at before you look at it. So this starts to build up when you're a baby. You start to identify shapes, and then it moves from there. Imagination, less immediate, retrieves mental copies of past sensations and perceptions, even when their external stimuli are no longer present. Belief is the sense or feeling that ideas or propositions formed in the imagination correspond to reality. Every proposition can be analyzed in terms of its object and whether that object is believed. The object of a proposition comprises a subject, such as my horse, a predicate, wings, and a relation between them. My horse has sprouted wings. The belief is the psychic attitude a mind has towards that object. For example, I believe it or deny it, or I am in doubt about it. So sensation, perception, imagination, and belief. Emotion and will. Like other animals, we have primitive instincts such as fear, some desires, and certain forms of sympathy, which do not require being taught them or consciously focusing on ends. However, we also have emotions that are learned behavior. However, we also have emotions that are learned, programmed behavior, and do involve such a focus. For example, a fear of failure and the desire for an academic degree. Right? Those are programmings put into us. Instincts and emotions thus overlap, the latter tending to cover a broader range of objects than the former. So just to insert that, this is where we get cognitive dissonance, where our instincts and our emotions don't match because we've had a layer of programming put over our instincts. So the desire for an academic degree is a program, and I have an academic degree, and I did not understand this at the time. I graduated last May. But the desire for an academic degree is a program that works on your survival instinct, right? So, what it does to you is it gives you a cognitive dissonance because your fleshly body, your instincts know that an academic degree is not going to give you survival, right? So you have a cognitive dissonance where the programming is telling you one thing and your instincts are telling you another. Instincts and emotions thus overlap, the latter tending to cover a broader range of subjects than the former. We tend to assume that perceptions trigger emotional responses. We assume that, eventuating in bodily expressions. That we suddenly see a bear, become frightened, and then tremble and run away. But James thinks the actual sequence is perception, followed by bodily expression, followed by emotional feeling. That we see the bear, tremble and run away, then feel those physical events is what we call fear. So I think that's true. One of the examples is my son got in a fight with some other boys across the street a couple years ago. They were like 8, 9, and he won the fight, but then he come back over and he sat down at the table, and he was pretty calm, but he just had a weird look on his face, and so I said, "Is something wrong?" And he just broke down crying and shaking, because the fear came afterward. The idea that emotions ultimately have physical causes emphasizes the intimate relationship between our bodies and our mental life. The human will is crucial for deliberately acting on our beliefs and emotions. So I just want to interject in there with the body. I had a lot of pain in my kidney after I shifted and after I got the new kidney. And when I realized that it had moved, that it was a new kidney, I started to tell myself to try to accept the new body, and the pain did go away, and it has not come back. So that's a good example that how intimate the relationship is between our bodies and our mental life. So the human will is crucial for deliberately acting on our beliefs and emotions. Sometimes we consider alternative courses of action and seem to select one among them as if making a voluntary decision. James maps out 5 sorts of decision making. Number 1, the reasonable sort, whereby we accede to rational arguments. Number 2, the sort that is triggered by external circumstances, such as overhearing a rumor. And number 3, the sort that is prompted by our submission to something within ourselves, such as a habit formed by past actions. Number 4, the sort that results from a sudden change of mood, such as might be caused by a feeling of grief. And number 5, the rare sort that is a consequence of our own voluntary choice, which will be identified as the will to believe. Whether we have free will or not is a metaphysical issue that cannot be scientifically determined. Okay. Epistemology. Even if philosophically interesting matters such as freedom versus determinism cannot be scientifically resolved, some sort of epistemological methodology is needed if we are to avoid arbitrary conclusions. Whatever approach is chosen, it is clear that James repudiates rationalism with its notions of a priori, or one thing before the other, existential truths. He is particularly hostile to German idealism, which he identifies with Hegel and which he attacks in many of his essays. That's not too important. As he makes clear in an essay titled The Sentiment of Rationality, the personality of the would-be knower and various practical concerns are far too relevant to allow for abstract intellectualism. So basically what he's meaning to say there is relations are a one-on-one can only be known or measured one-on-one, that you can't I haven't read much Hegel. German idealism. Should we look at that or should we go forward? Okay, well, there's a gap there, but you can look at that. Sorry, gap in my research. On the pragmatic method, James' book of lectures on pragmatism is arguably the most influential book of American philosophy. The first of its 8 lectures presents pragmatism as a more attractive middle ground between the 2 mainstream approaches of European philosophy. The tender-minded approach tends to be rationalistic, intellectualistic, idealistic, optimistic, religious, committed to freedom, monistic, I don't know what that means, and dogmatic. By contrast, the tough-minded approach tends to be empirical, grounded in sensations, materialistic, pessimistic, irreligious, fatalistic, pluralistic, and skeptical. It is difficult to identify many pure types of either of these in the history of philosophy, and some thinkers are deliberately mixed, as is James himself. He thinks that most of us want a philosophical method that is firmly anchored in empirical facts, while being open to, rather than dismissive of, moral and religious values. So he believed that we needed both of these things. He offers pragmatism as a philosophy that coherently meets both demands. James' second lecture is committed to showing how the pragmatic method helps us establish meaning by making it a function of practical consequences. The word pragmatic means having to do with action and is etymologically related to our English word practical. Before we invest much time or effort in seeking the meaning of anything, we should consider what practical difference it would make if we could find out. Providing an example to illustrate his point, James refers to the Hegelian notion of God as the all-encompassing absolute spirit. So this is my view. How should we decide whether this is what we mean by God? Consider the practical consequences for a believer. On the one hand, it would provide us with the optimistic, comforting assurance that everything will work out for the best. But on the other, it also undermines the values of human individuality, freedom, and responsibility. From that pragmatic perspective, James rejects the Hegelian notion. Undoubtedly, philosophy provides us with only one legitimate approach to belief, as he observes in his fifth lecture, others being common sense, with its basic concepts derived from experience and science. However, these others are important in dealing with questions of freedom and value. Right. So I'm going to go down here a little bit, and we're going to go to the will to believe in God. Because we do not naturally experience the supernatural, James, the radical empiricist, thinks of faith in God as falling short of knowledge. Yet such faith is pragmatically meaningful to many people, and it is reasonable to wonder whether, how, and to what extent it can be justified. For James, the logical philosopher trained in science, both logic and science have limits beyond which we can legitimately seek the sentiment of rationality. That's the logos, what they're meaning to say, the sentiment of rationality. It doesn't quite cover the logos concept, but his notorious Will to Believe essay is designed to be a defense of religious faith in the absence of conclusive logical argument or scientific evidence. It focuses on what he calls a genuine option, which is a choice between two hypotheses, which the believer can regard as living, personally meaningful, forced, mutually exclusive, and momentous, involving potentially important consequences. Whether an option is genuine is thus relative to the perspective of a particular believer. James acknowledges that in our scientific day there is something dubious about the voluntaristic view that in some circumstances we can legitimately choose to believe in the absence of any objective justification. However, he claims we naturally do so all the time, our moral and political ideas being obvious examples. We legitimately choose to believe our moral and political ideas in the absence of any objective justification. So, what they're saying there is that we choose to believe lies. When you believe that your mother loves you, or in the sincerity of your best friend, you have no conclusively objective evidence. In addition, you will never be able to secure such evidence. Yet it often seems unreasonable to refuse to commit to believing such matters. If we did so, the pragmatic consequences would be a more impoverished social life. So this is how it ties into thought as frequency, right? So indeed, in some cases, believing and acting on that belief can help increase the chances of the belief being true. Now let us apply this argument to religious belief. What does religion in general propose for our belief? The two-pronged answer is that ultimate reality is most valuable and that we are better off if we believe that. Committing to that two-pronged belief is meaningful, as is the refusal to do so. At any given moment, I must either make that two-pronged commitment or not. And how I experience this life, as well as prospects for a possible afterlife, may be at stake. So your two-pronged belief here, it is meaningful because the one path is the path that the NPCs take, right? They choose to believe in the reality that they see and that it is not changeable, right? And we have committed to the other belief, right? Whether one makes that commitment or not, pragmatic consequences can be evolved. Nor should we imagine that we could avoid having to make a choice, as the commitment not to commit is itself a commitment. So this is what I think is happening with a great many of the NPCs, a commitment not to commit. It is in itself a commitment. It's a commitment to the reality as a real. So, the varieties of religious experience. And this relates to thought as frequency too, because I do feel that religious experience are manifestations of our beliefs and also the beliefs of others, or the beliefs that are coming out of the medium um, into contact with you, the word being the medium. If religious faith is not to be reduced to arbitrary whimsy, the will to make believe, it must rest on some sort of personal experience, like the Mandela effect. As psychologist and philosopher, James deliberately defines religion broadly as the experiences of human individuals insofar as they see themselves related to whatever they regard as divine. This definition indicates that religious does not require faith in a transcendentic monotheistic God, a transcendent monotheistic God, and that it does not mandate the social dimension of religious community. James distinguishes between healthy-mindedness and the sick soul as two extreme types of religious consciousness, the former being characterized by optimistic joy and the latter by a morbid pessimism. In between these extremes are the divided self and the stable, well-integrated believer. This relates to our frequency. Personally, I believe the programming is meant to create the sick soul, right? And to create a more divided self. So a stable, well-integrated believer, it's not what they believe in. It's that they have that belief that is relatively free of programming that is creating the cognitive dissonance that you see with so many people. So James develops lengthy analysis of religious conversion, saintliness, and mysticism. In going beyond these, he considers what philosophy might contribute to establishing overbeliefs regarding the existence and nature of the divine. He critically considers traditional arguments for God, the cosmological argument, the argument from design, the moral argument, and the argument from popular consensus, finding none of them particularly cogent, but exhibiting the most respect from the argument from design. He likewise weighs in the balance and finds wanting arguments for metaphysical and moral divine attributes, finding the latter of more pragmatic relevance to human values, choices, and behavior than the former. So in James' view, again, he looks at the actions. He is literally has developed a philosophy based on judge ye them by their fruit. In his final lecture, he draws conclusions regarding three beliefs that experience finds in religions in general. Number one, that our sensible world is part of and derives its significance from a greater spiritual order. Number two, that our purpose is fulfilled by achieving harmonious union with it. And number three, that prayer and spiritual communion are efficacious. Furthermore, religions typically involve two psychological qualities in their believers. Number one, an energetic zest for living. And number two, a sense of security, love, and peace. Given that thought and feeling both determine conduct, James thinks that different religions are similar in feeling and conduct, their doctrines being more variable and less essential. Most generally, these doctrines attempt to diagnose a fundamental uneasiness about our natural state and to prescribe a solution whereby we might be saved. This describes part of the programming in doctrine, religious doctrine of all sorts. Yeah, it is meant to create a fundamental uneasiness about ourselves and to prescribe a solution even if we haven't done anything wrong, right? The solution is merely to extinguish the uneasy emotion, right? But it's an impractical and meaningless action. Although, I want to go back though, right? You do ask for Jesus and you do ask for the Holy Spirit, and you get those, and you get those. But in my personal belief, I am sorry. I personally cannot come to terms with the idea that everyone has to do the exact same thing in order to be saved. But I could be totally wrong, and I'm willing to wait and see. James' own religious views. Let's see. He believes there is more to reality than our natural world, and that this unseen realm generates practical effects in this world. If we call the Supreme Being God, then we have reason to think the interpersonal relationship between God and humans is dynamic, and that God provides us with a guarantee that the moral values we strive to realize will somehow survive us. James describes himself as a supernaturalist rather than a materialist, of a sort less refined than idealist, and as unable to subscribe to popular Christianity. He is unwilling to assume that God is one or infinite, even contemplating the polytheistic notion that the divine is a collection of godlike selves. So that's interesting to me. I don't agree, but that is interesting. In the dilemma of determinism, James depicts his image of God with a memorable analogy, comparing God to a master chess player engaged in a give and take with us novices. We are free to make our own moves, yet the master knows all the moves we could possibly make, the odds of our choosing one over the others, and how best to respond to any move we choose to make. This indicates two departures from the traditional Judeo-Christian concept of God, in that the master is interacting with us in time rather than eternal, and does not know everything in the future to the extent that it is freely chosen by us. So something to think about. I'm not sure that I agree with that either, but it is something to think about. In Reflex Action and Theism, James subscribes to a theistic belief in a personal God with whom we can maintain interpersonal relations, who can possess the deepest power in reality, not necessarily omnipotent, and a mind, not omniscient. We can love and respect God to the extent that we are committed to the pursuit of common values. In Is Life Worth Living, James even suggests that God may derive strength and energy from our collaboration. Do you guys see where I'm getting here, where I'm going here with thought as frequency? Elsewhere, rejecting the Hegelian notion of God as an all-encompassing absolute, he subscribes to a God that is finite in knowledge or in power, or in both, one that acts in time and has a history and an environment like us. So that part of it, that last sentence, in my view, may be going a little bit too far, right? So, number 5, metaphysics, realms of reality. In contrast to monists, I don't know what a monist, must be a one God person, must be me. James believes in multiple worlds, specifying 7 realms of reality we can experience. So this is in the late 1800s. This late 1800s. The realm that serves as the touchstone of reality for most of us is the world of physical objects of sense experience. Number 2, the world of science, things understood in terms of physical forces and laws of nature, and that's available to the educated. Number 3, philosophy and mathematics expose us to a world of abstract truth and ideal relations. Number 4, as humans, we are all subject to the distortions of commonplace, illusion, and prejudices. Number 5, our cultures expose us to the realms of mythology and fiction. Number 6, each of us has his or her own subjective opinions, which may or may not be expressed to others. And number 7, the world of madness can disconnect us from the reality in which others can readily believe. Okay, so number 7, no, this is the Mandela world. Number 7 has now been solved. It is not the world of madness. It may seem that way. Now, I think from all the synchronicities, we're starting to see that the world is purposed and structured, and that everything is meant, that it is not madness. Now, as I've been talking about, this is a direct opposite belief that the 7th realm would be the world of madness to the logos belief of the Greeks. Directly opposite, right? So personally, the realm number 7, the realm of reason, but also the realm of the Mandelas. That's how it could be mad, I guess. Strange the way that's put. All right, normally we can inhabit more than one of these and be able to discriminate among them. What we take to be real must connect with us personally. Yeah? Thought is frequency. We are frequency. And what we take to be real must connect with us personally because we find it interesting and or important, which emphasizes elements of both subjectivity and pragmatic relevance. So let's see, how long have I gone on? Since 4:44. Yeah, that's quite a ways. We've got monism versus pluralism, freedom and morality, human freedom, moral responsibility. He's got the meaningless of life here, and social philosophy section, a lot more here. Now I'm not sure I read this, but after metaphysics, I felt that a great deal of this was programming. So, but I've gone on long enough, and I hope you can see how this relates to thought as frequency, how we have the various, the stream of consciousness and the self, the different parts of the self and the different parts of the thought, right? How these interact, they create a frequency around you. Not only how they interact with others in these relationships that I talked about, how the frequency of our thoughts interacts with our 7 realms of being, right? which the seventh would be reason, or the logos. So I like to end it there. That sounds great. I love you guys. Have a great day. God bless you. I think that I will try to be, yeah, it's Thursday. I'll go ahead and get on tonight at around 10 p.m. Mountain Time and just do a little discussion. Maybe somebody has something to talk about this. And as well, I am planning on doing, it looks like it's going to be a series on the Black Knight satellite. So, which I think is extremely important to us. And I'm surprised that it hasn't come up with anything that I've looked at yet. So I just want to throw out there in my next research project, the Black Knight satellite, which I've already started on. So I've just wondered anybody that's done any research on that, if they had anything to say, to join the chat or to leave a link or something for me to look at. That's cool too. Anyway, I love you guys. God bless you.